Mystery surrounds a shock last-minute cancellation by Prince William. The palace only revealing the royal no-show was due to a personal matter.
Lady Louise Mountbatten Windsor was never supposed to be the royal everyone watched. She was not the future queen. She was not a tabloid regular. She was not the one standing on palace balconies at the center of constitutional drama. For most of her life, she existed at the edge of the royal picture, present but not pushed forward, known but not loudly marketed. And that, perhaps, is exactly why this story feels so quietly powerful, because in a family built on rank, visibility, and expectation, the granddaughter who was raised almost in the shadows may have become the one entrusted with something far more personal than status. Not a title, not a public role, not a grand announcement, a place. And in royal life, a place can mean everything. The story begins, appropriately, with fragility. Lady Louise was born early, in difficult circumstances, after an emergency delivery that reportedly left doctors deeply concerned for both mother and child. Her entrance into the world was not wrapped in royal ease or ceremonial calm. It was abrupt, frightening, and uncertain. That kind of beginning has a way of marking a family. It creates a memory stronger than protocol. It reminds even royals that bloodlines do not protect anyone from fear. And for Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, that fear seems to have mattered. Because from the earliest years, there was a sense, quiet but repeated often enough to linger, that Lady Louise was not just loved, she was cherished. Part of that came from the way she was raised. Prince Edward and Sophie made a deliberate choice with their children.
There was certainly an element of making my grandfather proud and honouring him by taking part in the award that has been so much of his life's work. And I definitely hope that I have made him proud.
They stepped away from the more visible royal model and gave Louise a life that felt, by royal standards, surprisingly ordinary. She was not pushed into public grandeur. She was not encouraged to lean on rank. Even the story that she once did not understand that her grandmother was, the Queen says something about the emotional atmosphere in which she grew up. To Louise, the monarch was not first a symbol. She was family, a grandmother, a presence before a position. That detail matters because it helps explain the heart of this story. Queen Elizabeth spent the better part of her life surrounded by people who wanted something: access, approval, favor, influence, attention, status. It is one of the strange burdens of monarchy. Even affection can arrive tangled with ambition. But Louise, by almost every public description, seemed to belong to a different category. She came across as unforced, natural, modest, someone who did not treat royal life as a ladder. And perhaps that is what made her so easy for the Queen to trust. There has long been talk, sometimes whispered, sometimes printed more directly, that Louise occupied a special place in the late Queen's affections. Royal families do not publicly declare favorites, of course, but every family has its softer corners, and Queen Elizabeth's bond with Louise appears to have been one of them. At Balmoral, especially, that connection seems to have deepened. Balmoral was never just a residence for Elizabeth. It was refuge, the place where she was least theatrical, most herself, most at peace. It was the setting for the royal family at its most private. Muddy boots, river walks, dogs, Highland air, old habits, and a version of monarchy that felt less like performance and more like inheritance. To be close to the Queen, there was to know her in a different register, and Louise, by all accounts, fit that setting. She was not the kind of granddaughter who arrived as a spectacle. She seems to have arrived as a presence, someone content to sketch, to walk, to observe, to spend time quietly. In a family where noise so often brings attention, quietness can become its own kind of distinction. The Queen appears to have noticed that. Prince Philip did too. His relationship with Lady Louise gives the story another emotional layer. Of all the royal grandchildren, she may have been the one most visibly linked to one of his deepest passions: carriage driving. This was not a staged hobby created for cameras. It was something real between them, something learned, practiced, and shared. When Prince Philip died and left behind some of his most personal carriage driving equipment and ponies, the symbolism was unmistakable. He was not just passing on objects, he was handing on a piece of himself to someone he believed would understand what it meant. And she did. Louise did not simply receive those things. She honored them. She used them. She carried his memory forward through action, not sentiment alone. That pattern matters because it tells us something essential. In this family, Louise has come to represent not appetite for inheritance, but steadiness with it. She doesn't merely receive, she safeguards. She doesn't seem to collect royal meaning for display. She absorbs it quietly, and if that is how the Queen saw her, then the idea that Louise might be entrusted with a private Balmoral property begins to feel less surprising, not because it has been formally laid out for the public in full, but because emotionally, it makes a kind of sense. The Balmoral estate is different from the more famous royal addresses the world knows by name. It is not Buckingham Palace. It is not Windsor Castle in the constitutional sense. Balmoral is private. That distinction changes everything. It means the monarch has far greater personal freedom over how parts of that estate are used, shared, or passed on. And because Balmoral is so deeply bound to family memory, any gift from within it carries extraordinary symbolic weight. A cottage there is not merely real estate. It is a gesture of intimacy, of confidence, of belonging. That is why reports surrounding Louise and a Balmoral cottage have resonated so strongly. Whether people refer to it as a retreat, a cottage, or something more poetic, the underlying emotional idea is the same. The late Queen wanted one of the quietest members of the family to have a place in the one landscape she herself loved most, and that opens the story outward, because if this is true, then it says something striking about how Queen Elizabeth understood legacy. Not all legacy is public. Not all succession is about crowns. There is a second, more intimate line of inheritance inside royal life, the line of trust. The line that asks, who will keep this place as it was meant to be kept? Who will understand the spirit of it? Who will not turn it into vanity, noise, or transaction? For the Queen, the answer may have been Louise. There is another reason the story feels significant. It quietly bypasses the logic of rank. Senior royals are supposed to matter most. The center of the institution tends to absorb the center of attention. But royal families are also families, and private inheritance has never been governed by public expectation alone. We already know there is precedent for meaningful properties on royal estates being passed directly to grandchildren rather than moving strictly by generational hierarchy. In that context, Louise's reported inheritance fits a deeper pattern, one in which affection, trust, and character can outweigh sheer prominence. Prince William's connection to this narrative gives it an interesting extra dimension. If he was supportive of Louise receiving such a gift, that would suggest recognition of something many within the family may already understand. Lady Louise, despite her low public profile, carries a kind of credibility that cannot be manufactured. She does not threaten anyone. She does not compete for headlines. She does not drag chaos behind her. In a monarchy exhausted by scandal, noise, and internal fracture, that kind of person becomes more valuable than people realize. And then there is Lord Ivar Mountbatten. His presence in the story matters not because he changes the legal reality of any inheritance, but because he represents a different kind of continuity, aristocratic understanding outside the main royal glare. As Louise's godfather, he stands in a long web of family relationships that are emotional as much as social. He understands old estates, old names, and the peculiar burden of being handed something historic that is part asset, part memory, part responsibility. If Louise is indeed entering that kind of inheritance story, then having someone like Ivar in her orbit makes sense. He belongs to the world of ancestral houses and quiet stewardship. So increasingly, does she. What makes Lady Louise so fascinating in all this is that she seems to embody an older royal ideal in a younger body. She has modern ordinariness, university life, train rides, summer work, a low-key presence. But she also seems to possess something almost old-fashioned in temperament. She does not appear hungry for spectacle. She appears comfortable with restraint. In a family where image has so often become a problem, restraint may be the rarest quality of all. That is why the so-called cottage story lands with such force. It is not just about a young royal woman receiving a property. It is about what that property symbolizes. A cottage at Balmoral would not be a reward for ambition, and it would be an acknowledgement of character, a sign that the Queen saw in Louise not merely a beloved granddaughter, but someone suited to custodianship. And custodianship may be the real theme here. Louise is not a flashy inheritance figure. She is not the type to turn a private royal gift into a personal brand. She gives the impression of someone who might actually understand why a place should remain private, why silence can be a form of respect, why certain things are worth preserving, not because they are glamorous, but because they hold memory intact. That would have mattered enormously to Queen Elizabeth, especially in her later years when the institution around her was increasingly pulled between tradition and modern pressure.
William recently made clear that Wren's Nest, a Victorian red brick house tucked into the Berkshire countryside, was never just a wedding gift. It was protection. While Camilla was reportedly pursuing a multi-million-pound literary centre for her son Tom Parker Bowles at Balmoral, William was quietly ensuring that Wren's Nest would belong to Lady Louise Windsor, legally, personally, and beyond the reach of palace manoeuvring. The house itself is modest by royal standards but deeply symbolic. Wren's Nest is not a palace, not a monument, and not a performance. It is warm, private, and deliberately distant from the suffocating spotlight of London, bought with private money. It was chosen to reflect the life Louise has actually built for herself. Not one of entitlement, but of work, restraint, and quiet purpose.
There is also a generational elegance to the story. The Queen, who spent her life carrying the weight of continuity, may have chosen one of the least disruptive younger royals as the keeper of a small but meaningful corner of her private world. Not the loudest, not the most strategic, not the most publicly central, the quiet one. The one who drew rabbits with younger cousins. The one who rode with Philip's legacy behind her. The one who seemed never to mistake privilege for identity. If that was her thinking, it tells us something beautiful about how Elizabeth understood dynasty. Not everything worthy must be elevated to the front row. Some of the most important people in a family are the ones who preserve its tone rather than its headlines. And that may be Lady Louise's role. She is still young. Her future is not fixed. There has been occasional speculation that she may one day take on a more formal royal function, especially as the working core of the family narrows and ages. She has the temperament for it, perhaps even the image for it. Dutiful, unobtrusive, grounded. But whether she becomes more publicly royal or remains largely private may not be the most important question. The more interesting one is whether she becomes one of those rare family figures who quietly anchor the institution from within, not through power, but through trust, because that is what this inheritance story really sounds like, trust. The Queen trusting Louise with a piece of Balmoral would mean more than affection, or it would mean the belief that this granddaughter understands what cannot be written into legal documents: the atmosphere of a place, the emotional code of a family, the dignity of handling something old without making it perform. In royal life, that is a gift far larger than square footage. So perhaps that is why this story has lingered so strongly, not because it offers scandal, but because it offers contrast. Tim, while other branches of the family are defined by grievance, publicity, financial questions, or institutional strain, Louise represents something almost startlingly calm. She feels like a counterexample, a reminder that the royal story is not only about those who break away or blow up the script, it is also about those who hold the fabric together quietly. If a Balmoral cottage really has been reserved for her, then maybe Queen Elizabeth was making one final deeply personal statement. Not about rank, not about glamour, not about who shouts loudest in public, about who can be trusted with silence. And in the British royal family, silence has always been one of the rarest inheritances of all. What do you think about this unique inheritance? Meaningful tradition or surprising royal move? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more fascinating royal stories and hidden details.